MicroBrewr Podcast, Session 37.
Welcome to MicroBrewr Podcast, going deep to get inside the craft beer industry and inside the heads of people who work there. Here's your host, Nathan Pierce.
Welcome to MicroBrewr Podcast. We talk about everything craft beer related with a focus for people looking at starting their own microbrewery or wanting to take their existing brewery to the next level. I'm your host, Nathan Pierce. Thank you for listening, everybody. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast in iTunes or Stitcher, whichever you prefer. And while you're there, please leave a rating and review. I've set up some easy links for you, microbrewer.com/iTunes or microbrewer.com/Stitcher, whichever you prefer. And I encourage you to also please support MicroBrewr. If you enjoy listening to the podcast, if you've gotten a lot out of it and you're learning some things, please help MicroBrewr out. Go to microbrewer.com/support MicroBrewr. There's some really easy steps at varying levels of engagement and commitment. I think there's 6 steps. So step 5 is shop from Amazon. If you're already going to buy something in Amazon, go to microbrewer.com/support MicroBrewr and go into Amazon through the affiliate link, or click on the link or click on the banner, and whatever you purchase, MicroBrewr will get 4% commission on that. It doesn't add anything to your purchase price. Then step number 6, if you really want to support MicroBrewr, is buy me a beer, please. There's a drop-down menu, and you could just transfer money by PayPal. There's like buy me a pint, buy me a growler, or fill my fridge for a week. I may or may not actually buy a beer with that, but it will definitely help offset the costs to host the audio and host the webpage and things like that. Thank you very much for doing that. That's microbrewer.com/support MicroBrewr. I really appreciate that. In this episode, I talk with Mark Carpenter from Anchor Brewing in San Francisco, California. It was an honor to sit down with Mark face to face at the brewery where he's been brewing since 1979. He's actually been working at the company since 1971, but they've been in that location since 1979. And on the same day, I had a tour of the brewery. So I added some photos to the show notes page at microbrewer.com/session37. I wasn't really aware until recently of Anchor's key influence on the craft beer movement. Anchor Brewing has been pivotal and foundational for the craft beer movement on a lot of points, actually. So it was really, really neat to be able to hear it firsthand directly from someone who's been there almost since the beginning, just a few years after Fritzs Maytag bought Anchor Brewing and began the turnaround for the company. And this also marks the first on-site interview I've done for MicroBrewr Podcast, and maybe the first on-site interview since episode 1. So the sound is a little bit echoey, but I think it's well worth it. The stories and insights that Mark Carpenter brings are really worth it. Here's the interview. Hey, Mark, I introduced you to the listeners. Let's take a few minutes and you could tell us more about you and your brewery here, where we're at today.
Very good, very good. I've started with Anchor in 1971 when there were only a total of 5 people. Fritzs Maytag, our secretary, Carolyn Estes, and 3 of us in the brewery. We did under 1,000 barrels of beer that first year, and we've grown quite a bit. It's been a hell of an opportunity working here, and a heck of a career.
I signed up to take the tour on the website, so I was kind of looking around and I saw the video that came out a few years ago. They were congratulating you on 40 years working here.
Yeah, it's been a while, and it's gone fast. I mean, as you get older, you'll see it. Just the years start to go by way too fast, and all of a sudden it's you're old and 40 years in place.
Wow. I'm approaching 40 years in age now, so you've worked here longer than I've been around. But yeah, I've noticed time goes by a little bit too quickly.
Yeah.
So how did you get the job here when it was
just starting out?
Yeah, it was, it was in 1971, so it was the 60s were just ending, and, that time in San Francisco was really something, all the different lifestyles and all the music scene and everything. It was, and lots of people were exploring different lives, and I had a job. I was working and doing quite well, but I wanted to do something different. I wasn't happy with what I was doing, and I happened to take a tour of the brewery, and I thought, man, this is a cool place. This would be fun to work here. Breweries are magic places. I don't care what brewery you take a tour of. They're fun, and they're just kind of magic places. And here was this tiny little brewery, at that time the smallest brewery in the U.S., and only one of, I forget what the number is, 40-something, I think, total breweries in the U.S. at that time, or definitely under 100. And I thought, man, this would be a fun place to work. And so I was lucky enough, I got to meet Fritz and had an interview and got hired. The rest is, it's just been great. It was an unbelievable place to learn to make beer, because in those days we were only selling, as I said, that first year, under 1,000 barrels, but we had a 57-barrel brew size. So we only had to brew once every 3 or 4 weeks, So when we brewed, we all brewed. When we moved beer to the cellar, we all did it. When we bottled, we all did it. So it was an unbelievable environment to learn brewing and to learn all about a brewery. And then as we grew, we got real busy at that little brewery, and we were brewing all the time. But it was, for me, it was perfect. It was nice and slow then, and I could learn it all, and it was just a lot of fun.
I was just reading a little bit, mostly on Wikipedia. I saw that Fritz Maytag bought Anchor Brewing. It's been around forever, since like the 1800s, right?
Yes, correct.
But he bought it in 1965 and really concentrated on changing the processes. So they call him the father of modern microbreweries.
Yeah, quite honestly, Fritz, unbelievable man, really. With the amount of foresight, I could give you all kinds of examples. I mean, he's just an unbelievable foresight and such a long vision of things. But he bought the brewery, and he used to drink the beer at a restaurant called the Old Spaghetti Factory, which was owned by a man named Freddie Koo, who was from Chicago, but opened this restaurant in North Beach, and he had steam beer on draft. And he liked steam beer because it was a real part of California history. It's made in the city, and so it was his only draft beer at that restaurant. And Fritz knew the guy, got to know him, and was hanging out there one night, and he was told that, look, the brewery's going out of business, and you ought to go see it. I don't think he intended for Fritz to buy it, but because Fred loved this beer, and the idea of the brewery being a real San Francisco beer, going back to the Gold Rush times, that he should go see it. And so Fritz did. And as I said before, the breweries are kind of magic places. Fritz went and saw it and thought, man, he said, this is a cool place, and he invested in it. He bought it. And he always says he bought it for less than you pay for a good car at the time.
Oh, wow.
But what he was buying was really kind of an 18th century brewery. There was no bottling line. There was only one pump in the entire brewery that pumped the wort from the kettle up to the cool ship. There was no refrigeration anywhere in the brewery. This was really a very crude, old brewery. And so when Fritz bought it, he realized that pretty early on that he had to really get a handle on the quality of the beer. Very often the beer was out in the trade was sour, was going bad. And so the first thing he did was build a little lab. The way he described it to me once was he built a small laboratory in the brewery and then just built cleanliness out from there and really got a handle on the quality. And once he got a handle on the quality, he started thinking, we have to be in bottles. In today's draft environment, you may not think that so quickly, but in those days, draft was not all that popular, and bars wanted bottles. And so Fritz knew that he was going to have to be in bottles for sure. to make a living. So he wound up piecing together a little brewery. He wound up hiring a guy named Gordon McDermott. And Gordon came along in 1968, I believe. And Gordon was really the man who put together the whole bottle shop and really got the bottling possible. Gordon's retired. He retired a number of years ago, and I was lucky enough to work for him. Boy, he's guy's unbelievable worker and very talented guy at putting together a bottle shop. I've learned a lot from him over the years. So again, it was just a great environment for learning.
So Anchor was already in bottles when you started working?
They started bottling in 71. And so just a few months before I started were the first bottles, yes.
So there was a lot of innovation and, like you said, learning going on even after you were hired.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because we were in bottles, but Fritz was in no real hurry to expand the brewery rapidly. Because he wanted to make sure that we were putting out quality beer. And if there's a learning curve with that was fine. He was willing to accept that. Fritz didn't start making a profit until 1974, so he went 9 years without making money, which a number of years ago in hindsight, I thought, man, how do you go 9 years not making money? And I asked him once, I said, how did you do that? Didn't you just to even if you can afford it, how do you get out of bed and get motivated to go to work, and he said his only answer was funny because usually he has such good answers. He said, and this may be a great answer, he said, well, I wasn't losing much money. And but then in 74 we started making a profit, and by 1977 we really were maxing out that little brewery, and he knew we had to move, and we wound up buying this building in 1977. Took us 2 years to move all their equipment out, get our brewery installed, and we started brewing here in August of 1979.
Wow. Okay, so it took a couple of years.
Yes.
Wow, that was really exciting times back then.
Oh yeah, because we were the only game in town, and that's why Fritz really deserves the title of the father of American brewing, because we were the only beer in America that really wasn't just a yellow beer, and it's funny because there was so little market for our beer. When Fritz first started bottling, he tried to sell it here in San Francisco, and he'd go to the restaurants on Fisherman Wharf saying, "I'm from Anchor Brewing. I've got a beer made right here in San Francisco." They didn't want it.
Wow.
And it was hard to believe in hindsight. Here, you're at Fisherman's Wharf, you got a beer made in San Francisco with an Anchor on the label at Fisherman's Wharf, and they don't want the beer. So he knew that he was going to have to sell around the United States to make a living. And that's one of the reasons we're national, is because he had to sell it a lot of places in order to make a living. If we were starting this brewery today, like many small breweries, they don't have to go very far. There's a nice market right in your hometown, But in order to make a living, we did have to start spreading out around the United States. And as I said, we were just really the only game in town. That it was, no one else was there. And towards the 80s, there were a couple little breweries starting up and not really doing much or doing well, but there were distributors who kind of saw this trend, and so they wanted our beer, and so we never really sought out distributors in those days. If they came to us, then Fritz would talk to them, and we may start selling here and there, and so we really saw the entire industry grow up around us. Yeah,
a lot of people say now is an exciting time in craft beer. How do you think it compares to the exciting time that you guys saw at Anchor after you started here?
Well, you can only grow up in your own time, right? So I'm sure for all the small brewers now, it is hugely exciting. And it is for us, too, to see how rapidly it's growing, And are we over 3,000 breweries in the U.S. now? Something like that.
Yeah, we're pretty close, if not.
And people have said to me, well, how much room is there for how many breweries can exist? Well, I think for every 0.1% of consumers that leave the major brewers, how many breweries is that? There's got to be 5-6 little breweries,
Yeah, that's a good point.
Overall sales of beer in the U.S. may not be growing, but our category is growing so rapidly. So for at least I'm not a good predictor, by the way, but for my foreseeable future, it seems to me there's still room for small breweries starting up. There's, if you look around the number of wineries that are around, we aren't even close to approaching the number of wineries that exist in California or the nation, So who knows how much room there is. But
I actually have a question from one of our listeners that I want to ask you later on about that. But I was reading that, I didn't realize, I was reading about Anchor Porter, that before that, the darker beers just had food coloring.
Correct. We when Fritz bought the brewery, we only made Anchor Steam Beer and Anchor Dark. And Anchor Dark was made with caramel coloring. And it was just made for 1 or 2 bars that somehow they wanted it. And that was not Fritz's style. And so he wanted to stop doing the dark and do a real dark beer. And so that's when we made our porter. And that was in 1973. And when we made the porter, it was unusual to have such a real dark beer here in the United States. There were lots of little breweries around the nation that did Bock beer in the springtime, but it was always just their regular lager beer with caramel coloring. And so here was a real dark beer. That was quite unusual. And also in 1973, when we made our when we made our porter, there was not one porter being made in England.
Whoa!
Yeah, not one. And so that's how bad the beer situation had gotten in Europe. It's the American microbrewery movement that has revived brewing in England and Europe. It really is. I mean, and it all started right here. In fact, the beer world is turned upside down. I mean, when we started looking for inspiration for different beers, well, obviously we went to Europe and we bring in European hops and whatnot. Well, now Europe is coming to us, bringing in American hops. And I went to Munich March of this year and had IPAs brewed in Munich. Now that's turning the beer world upside down.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting. Man, I don't know if I should get into it. I don't know if I'll leave this in, but I hear a lot of people in American beer talking about the old German brewing laws and stuff like that. I'm like, man, in what other food would you say that you have to stick strictly to a recipe from 500 years ago?
Yeah.
So why do we have to stick with old beer recipes? Why can't we get innovative?
Well, and American brewers have, because they because they've started up. Yeah, it's interesting because the Reinheitsgebot, it doesn't even allow for yeast.
Yeah, they didn't know it existed.
Yeah, they didn't know it existed.
And the Liberty, was it called the Liberty Ale? Actually, well, tell me about the Liberty Ale and the Cascade hops.
Yeah, the Liberty Ale was we did for the 200th anniversary of Paul Revere's ride. 1976 was coming up. We did that in 1975. 1976 was coming up, where the nation was going to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the nation. And it wasn't like Fritz to jump on the bandwagon for that. So he wanted to celebrate the 200th anniversary of Paul Revere's ride. And so we brewed Liberty Ale for the first time on April 18th of 1975. And it was only one brew, and we released it, and it was only about 400 cases, something like that. And we used the Cascade hop. Fritz had a hop grower who's become a good friend over the years, and he recommended using this new hop, Cascade hop. No one was really using it as an aroma hop, and it was very new at the time. And so Fritz decided to try and do it, and so we did. And we used the Cascade hop, and you know what's happened? It went on to be in the West Coast ale hop. Now you can get all kinds of European brews made with Cascade hops. And I think they're even growing Cascade hops in Germany now. So
wow,
it's that's again, it started here and just gone around the world.
So late in recent beer history, there's been like the push for the bitterness. What did people think of the hoppiness of that Liberty Ale when it first came out?
Yeah, when we first came out with the Liberty Ale, people said, "Oh, you can't drink this; it's too hoppy. You're burping up hops all day." And it's funny in hindsight because the Liberty Ale we brew today is virtually the same, yet it tastes quite middle of the road. We should have built in an inflation factor into our Liberty Ale to keep it on the edge. But I still think it's a fabulous pale ale with wonderful flavor. But it certainly isn't the hoppiest beer on the block by far.
Well, you've had some pretty neat times at Anchor Brewing. Thanks for broadening the picture. Now I want to get to these questions that I ask every brewer.
Very good.
About starting a brewery, to give us some insight on that. And I like to go real deep, real fast.
Okay.
So tell me, what's the biggest mistake you've ever made as a brewer?
If you're talking about things like leaving a valve open and all the work goes on the floor, or a cellar tank open and the beer goes down, boy, I've made way more than my share of those mistakes, and everybody has here. And you can get away with almost anything here once. If you make a habit of it, you're not going to be here long. But it seems like almost you have to make those kinds of mistakes to learn, So I don't know if that's exactly the type of mistakes you're referring to, but I would say the biggest mistake, if I look over the long term, the biggest mistake is knowing that you have to get rid of somebody and not doing it soon enough, You tend to hang on, hope they'll change, hope things will work out. And anyway, so that's probably the biggest mistake, is cutting people loose when you need to, and recognizing that they aren't going to change.
Staffing issues, huh?
Yeah.
Interesting. I don't think I've heard that answer yet. So if you could start your career as a brewer over again, is there anything that you do differently to do it better?
Boy, no, because you have to keep in mind that here I was at this little brewery where we only brewed once every 3 or 4 weeks, so we could really take our time at it, And at our old brewery, when you see our brew house here, we have this beautiful copper brew house that we brought in from Germany with a separate mash tun, lauter tun. But at the old brewery, we had a combination mash tun, lauter tun. And it was heated by live steam, very unusual and always considered not a good practice for the malt and everything, but it was heated by live steam. And so we had these 3 steam valves we'd open when we'd want to raise the temperature. And boy, it just sounded like a giant espresso maker when you turn those on. And we'd start brewing at like 4 in the morning, and just to be in that brewery and in that environment learning, it was. No, I don't think I'd change a thing. I mean, it was just too good a way to learn to brew.
You could take your time to learn the craft.
Exactly.
Nice. So what was the best idea that you've ever had for the brewery?
Oh boy, I don't know. You'd have to ask somebody else that. Yeah, ask Fritz Maytag that. I know that we had a heat exchanger for cooling the wort. It's one of the first things that Fritz changed at the brewery, is to get away from the cool ship. The cool ship, you just put the hot wort in the cool ship and it cooled down overnight, giving all kinds of opportunity for all kinds of wort bacteria to get going. And so we changed to a heat exchanger where you cool it very quickly. You have cold water going one way, the hot wort going the other way. And so when I started, when we'd clean it, we would clean the heat exchanger with the cleaning solution going the same way that the wort went, and we'd open it up and you'd see little hop seeds and stuff that didn't get pushed out. And so one day I said to Gordon, I said, why don't we clean it going the other way? So that the seeds that worked their way in didn't have to get pushed all the way through and out. They just had to get pushed back as far as they came in. And So we did. So that was a good idea. That was early on, but
So pushing the rinse water back in the opposite direction changed things.
The chemical, the cleaning solution, just going the opposite way, because then the debris that gets into the heat exchanger didn't have to work its way all the way through and out. It would just have to go back as far as it came in.
Are you still doing it that way today?
Oh yeah.
Does every brewery do it that way? Is that common now?
I'm sure it is. I mean, I think somehow Gordon just didn't think it'd do it. That they'd have to be. It's really, in hindsight, that'd have to be the only way to do it. But now, if you had a product with no solids in it that could get trapped, it would be fine to go the same way, I think. But
right.
Yeah.
Has there been a moment when you realized that you finally succeeded?
There was, and it's kind of funny, I think. We did a mild not that long ago. I've always loved mild, and I could never convince Fritzs to brew a mild. And so we have our new owners, and they wanted to do some special beers. And I said, well, how about a mild? And so they said okay to that. So we brewed it, and then we moved it to the cellar. And it had been in the cellar a little while, and I thought, well, I better taste it and see what it's like. We were going to do more than one brew, and I was thinking, okay, so we may have to adjust one way or the other on these next brews. And so I went to the cellar and I got a sample, and I brought it up to the lab, and I poured it in a glass. And all these things are going on in my mind. Well, look for this, or what do we have to change? Anyway, I take a drink, and I just thought, man, it's a mild. I could be standing in a pub in England, and this is a mild. And I wasn't even concerned, well, is it a good mild or a bad mild? It was mild, It was just as if I was standing in a pub and ordered a mild and they handed it to me, I'd say, okay. So yeah, that was cool. That was a fun moment. And I thought, boy, I did it. I really brewed a mild.
You did it on the first try?
Yeah.
Is that what you're excited about, to do a mild finally?
Well, just to actually have it taste like a mild, because so often you try to duplicate a beer, and it never comes out exactly right, But this was just a mild. Boy, it just carried me right to England. And so we never changed a thing. We just did, I forget the number of brews who did whatever it is, who did them all with that recipe. I thought it was great. It wasn't a huge seller. I think I suggested we not call it a mild because I think it's a name that it's not appealing to American beer drinkers. They want, I thought if you just gave it kind of a fanciful name, and because it was a delicious beer. But anyway, I was happy with it.
So that's not in the lineup anymore?
It was never intended to be in the lineup. We have this Zymaster series that is a series of one-offs that we do. And there have been a couple of Zymasters that have become full-time, but they're not really intended to be or necessarily to be full-time. They're just different beers, which gives us an opportunity to try different beers and get them out there and see what people think.
What's your favorite memory since working at the brewery?
Yeah, I think, there's so many. As many good memories as mistakes I've had, right? Mistakes I've made.
Oh, wow.
But going back to that first brewing at the old brewery, in the dark of the morning, in our little brew house, those were really fun days for me, and being there on my own, just starting the brew, it was just really fun to actually be brewing beer, so those are good times. We've certainly had, with Fritz, I've had so many opportunities. He's taken a number to Europe and sent us to different brewing schools and been to breweries around the world, and so those are all good memories. But I think just starting up the brew at the old brewery, it was a lot of fun.
You have some seniority now. Do you still have to wake up so early?
No, but when I do come in early just because I try to get out real early. But because I live north of the city, so it's nice just to beat the traffic and get to work.
Miss the commute.
Yeah.
Well, now we have a question from one of our listeners, Michael Rollader, who asks, has the market reached the saturation point? Is there still room for another craft brewer?
As I said earlier, I think there's room for lots more. I mean, I may be wrong. I'm not a good predictor. I wouldn't take any of my financial advice. But if you just look at the number of wineries in California, and if you just look at the trend away from the mass marketed breweries, they'll always be huge because they're light beer breweries. They brew Coors Light, Miller Lite, and Bud Light, and that's huge volume for them. And I don't think the micros are ever going to take that away. But the micros are taking away their lager drinker, and I think that trend will continue. When we first started selling our beer outside of the state, Fritz had me go to different areas sometimes to talk to distributors. Once you got, a couple feet outside any major city, craft brewed beers, microbeers did not exist.
Wow.
Only in the major cities. Well, now they're everywhere, and so that trend's going to continue. I don't know where the saturation point is, but if you look at the number of wineries, we're not even approaching that. And so many little breweries may not have ambitions to be big breweries. They may just want to continue being little breweries in their hometown, making a living, making great beer. So I think there's a lot of room for breweries of all size.
I don't have any clue how many wineries are in California. I know California has the most breweries out of all the states, though. So what do you think if we're going to have as many wineries as there are in California, that's like your old school kind of neighborhood brewery sort of thing, like a brewery on every corner. What do you think is the future with that?
Well, I think it's happening already. I live in Petaluma, actually, just a little outside of town. But when I moved there, they had no interest in having Anchor Steam Beer or any other microbrewery, and that was in the early '80s. And now, I think there's 5 or more than 5 breweries in Petaluma.
Wow, small town, isn't it?
Yeah,
I've never been there.
Yeah, no, it's not a big town at all. But there's lots of little breweries right there. Lagunitas certainly the biggest.
Right, they're known for Lagunitas, and that's pretty large. So if they still have room for some other smaller ones, there's plenty of room.
Oh yeah, so that's right there. There's so every little town has lots of room, I think, for more breweries.
All right, now it's time for happy hour. The next set of questions are a little bit lighter. We're going to get to know each other a little better and have some fun and get inside the industry. Are you ready, Mark?
Ready. Go for it.
Cans or bottles?
Oh man, cans have been hugely successful in the industry. Really, it's what the public wants and accepts, and cans certainly seem to be accepted. So and we've started canning. We do our lager beer in cans, and so I think you're going to see more and more cans. I mean, customers like them. They're so much lighter to carry with you if you go somewhere camping or fishing or whatever. Than carrying bottles. And the cans, I was just talking to our lab guy the other day, the cans are our lowest air count is in the cans, so the beer's going to last well in the cans, and so that keeps the brewer happy. So I think you're going to see cans, both cans and bottles around.
What's the most challenging beer that you've ever made?
Oh, that's a good question. I should say the mild because I was so successful at it. No,
you only tried once though with that one. You got it on the first try.
Yeah, I guess we'd have to say our IPA because we had so many people looking at it in the brewery, looking at it and criticizing and putting in their 2 cents. Also, when we first made the IPA. It was challenging because there are so many IPAs out there. We've made so many beers that could have been called an IPA. We've just never have. But so now we're going to put one out that had IPA on the label, and so I started to look around at the IPAs that were out there, figured out which ones I like, which ones I don't like, and what are the things I like about the ones I like, and try to incorporate those kind of notes into the IPA that we made. So that was probably the most challenging. And then to make everybody else here happy.
Yeah, a lot of expectations when you call it an IPA, right?
Exactly.
If you're going to make a 5-gallon batch at home this weekend, what beer would you make?
Oh, I've never home brewed. The only thing I've ever brewed alcohol I've made at home is cider, hard cider. I do that from time to time because it couldn't be easier and it's good. So no, I've never home brewed.
That's cool though. So if somebody wants to take out home brewing, maybe start with cider.
Absolutely, because it could not be easier, and it's fun. You can make just it by itself, or you can age it with wood products. You can do all kinds of things with cider, and so no, that's like I say, it couldn't be much easier.
Tell me one beer style that you think will be gaining more attention.
Well, IPA is here for a long time. I think you're going to see more attention to some of the German styles because there's been so much attention to ales and the more English style or Belgian, and I think the German style beers have never had the flavor profiles that I think most microbrewers have been really after. But now there's a huge market for it. When we made our lager beer, what we were trying to do, in fact, the lager beer was our first Zymaster. And it was actually the suggestion of a guy I worked with, Mike Lee, when I was talking about what should we do for this first Zymaster. And he said to me, why not a lager? And I thought, lager's so boring, But I said, Mike, every time I tell the steam beer story, I always mention that those first brewers wanted to make lager beer. They didn't want to make some unusual beer, but they couldn't make lager beer because they didn't have refrigeration. They hadn't set up ice houses. But as soon as they could, they did. And so I thought it would be fun to make a lager that we think would have been the very first California lager, would have been a duplicate of that very first California lager, which we know was made in Boca, California in 1872 or 5, somewhere right around there. And we know they would have had California malt. I would bet money they would have used cluster hops because cluster hops took off in California. They were grown here. They did really well here. Oldest hop in America too, by the way. But I'd almost bet money they used cluster hops. We know about what the bitterness would have been. We know what the alcohol would have been, and so that's what we did. And we thought it was a great lager. And the owners liked it so much they decided we should come out with it. And that's been a huge hit with us. It's just a nice, rich lager. And so I think attention to those types of beers. There's a few other breweries coming out with lagers now. Kolsch, there's a few breweries with Kolsch, alt beer. I think that will probably be a trend in the future. Is German style beers. While the Germans now are starting to brew American style beers, we'll start brewing their beers.
Well, the California lager, is that the lager that you were talking about?
Correct.
I tasted that, I think, for the first time at the San Francisco Giants. Oh man, what do they call it? San Francisco Giants Beer Fest.
Oh, really?
My friends played. They're in a band and they played out front before a Giants game.
Yeah.
Me and another friend, John from Santa Cruz, got to be roadies for our friends in the band. So we got to go to the Giants game and stuff. When I was like, well, I don't have to drive till much later. I was the designated driver for the band after the game. I had to drive everybody back home. So I was just tasting some beers, and I was really impressed. I was like, I don't like lagers, but it's from San Francisco. I'm in San Francisco now. I'm going to try it. And that's the first lager that I really liked a lot.
Well, thank you.
And I actually started writing a blog, and that was my second post saying what the San Francisco Giants Brewfest taught me about the future of lagers.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a big future because you're talking about like if we take even just a small percentage of the mass beer market,
yes,
it's going to make a big difference for craft beer market. And I think if you want to get the converts, you're going to have to give them something that they're used to drinking, something that's close to that.
And a real lager, all malt. Mm-hmm. Even the modern German lagers, they're trying to make them lighter and lighter in color and character, which is hard for them because they can't use corn or rice like American brewers can. But they just try to make them much lighter. And I don't think the German lager you get today is the same it was 40 years ago, Mm. But I think our California lager it's just a very traditional all malt lager, I'm glad you liked it.
It's really nice.
Well, thank you.
Good job on that one. Can you suggest a book for our audience that will help them succeed in a long, awesome career in brewing like you have?
Well, I don't know. It's probably not the book these days, but boy, the very first Michael Jackson World Guide to Beer. I just thought that was such a good book. And just such good descriptions of all the beers that existed. It's obviously focuses mainly on Europe. It's got some Australia, and I just think it's a great beer book.
Nice. I don't think anybody's mentioned that one yet, but I'll add it to the list of recommended books.
Very good.
We have that at microbrewer.com/book list. So, Mark, tell me something that you're really excited about right now.
Well, it would have to be our Christmas ale because we've been brewing it. It gets released very soon, November 1st. And as for a number of years now, it's a spiced ale. But we've really made some bigger changes than usual this year. For the past number of years, we've done a spiced ale, and we change it every year. But I kind of view it not changing it just to change. It's kind of been an evolution, and it's been evolving, and I think we've made a pretty awfully good spiced ale, and so I thought, how much more can we really modify that? So this year we made some of the bigger changes than we've made for a long time. It's put us on a slightly different path, and so I'm curious to see how it's accepted, what kind of emails we get about it, and whether we continue that path or start another one or go back to where we were. So that's probably the most exciting thing right now for me. We always get one email, or at least one, saying it's the worst beer they've ever had.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
We always get at least one or more that say it's the best beer they've ever had.
I look forward to that beer every year.
Well, thank you.
It's one of my favorite beers.
Yeah, and it's really funny because we'll get these emails about, your last year was so much better or something, and the difference could be so minor from the previous year. So I think so much goes into drinking any beer. It has to be your state of mind, what food you're having, you're with friends or not. Or I always think the best test for our Christmas ale is Thanksgiving dinner. You have your Thanksgiving dinner and a nice glass of our Christmas ale and see how well they go together. That's my test. That's when I decide if it's successful or not.
A couple times I've gotten the extra large, big, what do you call it, a Magnum bottle.
Yeah.
And shared that with friends.
Yeah. That's a beautiful bottle, huh?
It's been a nice occasion. Do you care to share the top secret recipe with our listeners?
We used to have, we used to not tell much about any of our beers. And with the new owners, they're much more open about our beers and what's in them and whatnot. But I still like to keep the Christmas ale pretty much secret. If other people here decide to give it away, that's up to them. But I like the idea of this secret recipe, and not so much that, it has to be secret. I'm not worried about it being stolen from us. But I think there's a lot of fun. I know it's a lot of fun in my house and with my friends, because at Thanksgiving or when they're drinking it, they'll start talking about it, and they'll get much more into it. If I told them what's in it, they drink and go, oh yeah, okay. But because they don't know, they may say, "Oh, this is pretty good this year," and then you're just talking about everything else, and they'll say, "Boy, do you get that such and such flavor in there, or whatever?" So I think I think it's much more fun. At least it is for me. I hope it is for the consumers, that they don't know, that they get to really think about what's in there.
Yeah, fun is the word that was coming to mind too. Before you even said that, I was going to say I think it keeps it more fun. It kind of falls in line of the Christmas tradition of like you don't know what's underneath the wrapping of your present.
Yeah, I like that. I've never used that analogy. I like that. I may have to steal that from you.
No problem. You heard it here first. Yeah, Christmas ale is just a lot of fun to share with friends and a lot of fun to kind of think about what's in it. And I think it just tastes great too. It's one of my favorites. So give us one last piece of advice for someone who just brewed the first batch at their new brewery, and then we'll close up the brew house for the night.
Well, I would say if they just brewed their first batch and they're getting ready to sell it, or don't worry about it, just go ahead and sell it and let the public be part of your experiment and listen to their feedback.
Listener feedback, great. Thanks for taking the time, Mark. It's really been an honor.
It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks for sharing your tips. So tell us how we can stay in touch with you, and then we'll set this episode aside to ferment.
The best way is email, or through the website, or my email, which is mcarpenter@anchorsf.com.
Thanks for especially talking with me here today in the brewery. This is my first interview of somebody in person. It's really cool.
It's a beautiful brewery, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm going to go take my tour now.
Very good.
Again, thank you, Mark Carpenter, for being on MicroBrewr Podcast. Thanks for sharing your story, and thanks for the tips on how to start and how to run a successful brewery. Listeners, please view the show notes at microbrewer.com/session37. Please go there and check out the links to connect and thank Mark for being on the show. The links to get in touch with Mark Carpenter and Anchor Brewing are at microbrewer.com/session37. Don't forget to check out microbrewer.com/support-microbrewr and see how you can support MicroBrewr. That's microbrewer.com/support-microbrewr. Thank you so much for that. And one way to support the show, by the way, is to leave a review in iTunes. There were a couple new reviews in iTunes. Jay Nobinger said, I'm in the process of opening a brewery in NC. I think that's North Carolina. And Joe and Nathan have been great in making me think of things and giving me ideas for my own place. And Titch23 from Australia says, this is one that I look for in my download folder each week. It started slow, but keeps getting better. So man, I think that's the first review that we've had from Australia. We've had one review from Ireland, 2 from Canada, and a bunch from the US. So if you're outside of the US and you're still getting the show in iTunes or Stitcher or however, please comment and let us know how we're doing. Let us know what's of interest to you. Send me a message anytime, any other way. You could send an email through the website, the form at microbrewer.com/contact, or you could reach MicroBrewr on Twitter and Facebook at MicroBrewr, and I'm on Untapped at Nathan Pierce. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, support your local brewery, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to MicroBrewr Podcast with Nathan Pierce. We'll see you right here next time at microbrewer.com.
If you want more resources for starting a craft brewery, check out microbrewr.com, microbrewer.com. If you want to become a Cicerone certified beer server, check out beerexamschool.com for free study guide and flashcards for the certified beer server exam. beerexamschool.com.